The chairperson of the Guyana Elections Commission has requested the presence of a high-level CARICOM commission to validate the recount of all the votes cast in the March 2nd general elections. 51 British members of Parliament have written to UK Foreign Secretary and Acting Prime Minister Dominic Raab to call for the US blockade of Cuba to be temporarily suspended during the COVID-19 pandemic. China has decided to send medical teams to Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia and Burkina Faso to assist their efforts against the COVID-19 pandemic. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. The chairperson of the Guyana Elections Commission, Justice Claudette Singh, requested the presence of a high-level CARICOM commission to validate the recount of all the votes cast in the March 2nd general elections. The request was officially communicated to CARICOM in light of the April 6 decision of the Elections Commission that it would be prudent to have the Caribbean community involved in the planned national recount. It was stressed that the purpose would not be to supervise the process as mere observers, as previously approved, but to validate it. On the instruction of CARICOM chairperson, Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, sent a high-level CARICOM team to Guyana on March 15th to supervise a planned national recount of the ballots, which had stemmed from an agreement between President David Granger and opposition leader Barrett Jagdeo. But the team withdrew from the process after it was beset by several irregularities. New coronavirus cases continue to be reported in the Caribbean, including among CARICOM members. 33 countries have reported positive cases so far. Across the region, 5,222 cases have been confirmed, while 325 deaths have been reported. Meanwhile, 674 Caribbean patients have recovered. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro this Wednesday referred to the high number of COVID-19 patients who have recovered from the virus.
We have 197 cases, 111 have recovered. That gives a percentage of 56% recoveries, and we have 30 patients admitted for treatment in comprehensive diagnostic centers, 25 in hospitals, 20 in private clinics, and unfortunately 9 deaths, and 2 in hotels.
Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega and Vice President Rosario Murillo offered a national televised address this Wednesday. Ortega began by expressing solidarity with the nations and peoples of the world facing the coronavirus pandemic. He stressed that the current global health crisis once again demonstrates that nuclear weapons and warfare developed by the richest nations are of no use to humanity, but only serve to cause more death. He highlighted that despite being the world's most powerful nation, the United States does not have the capacity to respond to the needs of its own citizens during this pandemic. Nicaragua has reported 9 COVID-19 cases and 1 death. Citizens of Puerto Rico took to the streets this Wednesday to protest the lack of medical supplies to face the COVID-19 pandemic. Hundreds of protesters demanded that the government of Wanda Vázquez provide social welfare in the midst of the health crisis. They stressed the lack of enough COVID-19 test kits and also highlighted reports of an irregular purchase of medical supplies made by the government from a US company, which was revealed by the Health Committee of the House of Representatives. Guatemala's health minister stated on Tuesday that deportees from the United States were driving up the country's COVID-19 caseload, adding that on one flight some 75% of deportees tested positive for the virus. Health Minister Hugo Monroy's comments contrasted with previous government statements on infected deportees. Presidential spokesman Carlos Sandoval later told reporters that Monroy was referring to a March flight on which between 50% and 75% of passengers during all their time in isolation and quarantine tested positive. Before Tuesday, Guatemala had only reported 3 positive infections among deportees flown back by the United States. The Guatemalan government has asked the United States not to send more than 25 deportees per flight in order to examine them before departure and certify that they are not infected. Deportations from the US have continued despite the coronavirus outbreak. The United States has about 34,000 people in immigration detention, down from about 37,000 last month. The novel coronavirus continues to spread across Latin America. Ecuador has reported more than 300 deaths and over 7,600 positive cases, mainly in the coastal city of Guayaquil, the epicenter of the epidemic. Ecuador has been under a state of emergency since March 16th, with strict measures that limit movement. Meanwhile, Colombia has reported nearly 3,000 COVID-19 cases, with the authorities confirming 15 more fatalities, taking the death toll to 127. Chile has now dropped to third place in the region with over 8,000 cases and a total of 94 fatalities. On Wednesday, Bolivia's de facto president, Janine Áñez, announced that the government had extended the country's nationwide COVID-19 lockdown through April 30th. Bolivia has reported 397 cases and 28 deaths. Brazil has reported over 26,000 COVID-19 cases and its death toll has reached over 1,500, making it the hardest hit nation in the Latin American region. According to the Brazilian Minister of Health, for the first time this Tuesday, the number of fatalities surpassed 200 in a single day. A field hospital set up in Manaus City received its first COVID-19 patients on Tuesday. The hospital will have a total of 150 beds and was established after the local government recognized that the health system is near collapse. Manaus is the only city in the state of Amazonas with intensive care units. The lack of hospitals, intensive care units and medical supplies has raised concerns among the authorities of Amazonas state, where 1,400 COVID-19 cases have been confirmed and 90 people have died. Despite the Argentinian government having adopted measures to protect workers during the coronavirus lockdown, there are growing complaints regarding salary reductions in the service industry. Let's take a closer look.
In the middle of a countrywide quarantine and in direct opposition to measures imposed by the national government, a number large of fast food chains have reduced the salaries of their workers.
The truth is, these multinational companies have had record profits lately, but even so they choose hurt workers. When profits are high, these are not shared with the workers. But when the goings get rough and there is a crisis going on, it's the workers who are made to pay. How are they supposed to go on during this time with even less money than before?
Social leader Celeste Fierro has warned that on top of these issues, this week a number of fast food places were reopened despite the quarantine.
How are these workers supposed to go back to work? What health guarantees are they receiving? Just before businesses shut down, workers weren't allowed to wear face masks. There was no disinfectant gel being provided, and we haven't seen anything that tells us conditions will be improved.
Social leaders say companies are taking advantage of the crisis to undermine labor rights.
Labor laws say that in prolonged closures caused by unforeseen catastrophes, like this current crisis, the company needs to pay workers a specific amount for the days they were unable to work.
Not only were these multinationals violating the decree signed by President Alberto Fernández, but just days ago, the Tech Int group laid off 1,450 workers.
More stories coming up after this very short break, so stay put. Welcome back to From the South. 51 British members of Parliament have written to UK Foreign Secretary and Acting Prime Minister Dominic Raab to call for the US blockade of Cuba to be temporarily suspended during the COVID-19 pandemic. Graham Morris MP, chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Cuba, coordinated a letter which asked the British government to make a public statement and to raise the issue directly with its counterparts in the United States government. The letter cites examples from around the world where governments and international organisations have demanded that humanitarian aid be allowed to reach Cuba to help the country fight COVID-19. The MPs also acknowledged that despite the difficulties Cuba is facing, the island has sent more than 700 medical professionals to 17 countries, including Italy, Andorra, St. Lucia and Jamaica. Cuba's assistance for passengers and crew of the stranded cruise ship MS Bremer to return home received widespread coverage in the United Kingdom and garnered further support for an initiative launched by the British Cuba Solidarity Campaign to call for an end to the US blockade, which has gained almost 15,000 supporters from more than 130 countries.
For instance, to respond pragmatically to this spread of the virus. As this disease...
The COVID-19 death toll has shot up dramatically in the United Kingdom, with 1 in 5 deaths in England and Wales linked to the coronavirus, while the government has been accused of underreporting deaths of the elderly in care homes. The death toll has increased by more than 5,000 in just 1 week, which suggests that official daily coronavirus figures published by the government have been inaccurate. Official figures showed that more than 93,000 people in the UK had tested positive for the coronavirus in hospitals, of which around 12,000 had died by this 4th week of lockdown. Meanwhile, the UK government has come under fire from senior health officials for not providing enough personal protective equipment for frontline workers. More than 2 million people have contracted COVID-19 globally since the outbreak began last December. More than half of the number relates to outbreaks in European nations, especially France, Italy and Spain. However, the single worst hit country is the United States, with over 642,000 confirmed COVID-19 cases and over 28,000 deaths. Meanwhile, the pandemic has reached some 185 countries, with only 15 UN member states without confirmed coronavirus cases. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen warned EU member states on Wednesday to be cautious in lifting the restrictive measures imposed to slow the spread of the coronavirus, as Austria, the Czech Republic and Denmark already began lifting some lockdown measures.
I want to make sure that this is not a signal that containment measures can be lifted as of now, but it intends to provide a frame for member states' decisions. In general, we recommend a gradual approach. Every action should be continuously monitored whether the virus flares up again or the spread of the virus stays stable below a certain threshold. If you have the threshold of the virus and the capacity in the healthcare system, you need sufficient surveillance and monitoring capacity in form of large-scale testing. These preconditions are accompanied in this roadmap by a series of recommendations to ensure a gradual, consolidated, and a coordinated access across the European Union.
I now pass the floor to...
China reported a fall in new coronavirus cases in the mainland on Wednesday, but an increase in number of local transmissions in its far northeast region bordering Russia. 46 new confirmed cases were reported on Tuesday, compared to 89 cases a day earlier, according to the National Health Commission. Of the new cases, 36 involved travellers arriving in China from overseas, compared with 86 a day before. China has closed the border with Russia at Sufein, a city in Heilongjiang province, with a border checkpoint into Russia. New infections involving travellers arriving from Russia have also hit other parts of China, such as the northern autonomous region of Inner Mongolia and the financial hub of Shanghai. The government has launched an epidemiological survey in 9 regions in an effort to determine the full scale of asymptomatic infections. The total number of confirmed cases in mainland China has surpassed 82,000. A year after the fire that devastated part of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, restoration works have been halted due to the national lockdown to stop the spread of the coronavirus. In April 2019, the fire destroyed a significant part of the cathedral's interiors and caused its famous spire to collapse. This Wednesday at 8 p.m, one of the cathedral's bells, named Emmanuel, joined the nightly rounds of applause for overstretched health workers. The 3-ton bell, located in the south tower of Notre Dame, traditionally rings on solemn occasions. And we're taking one final break now, but stay with us for more. The decision by US President Donald Trump to freeze funding to the World Health Organization in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic has sparked global condemnation. The chairman of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki Mahamat, described Trump's decision as deeply regrettable and stressed that today more than ever the world depends on the WHO's leadership to steer the global COVID-19 pandemic response. He noted in a Twitter post that all countries have a collective responsibility to ensure the organization can fully carry out its mandate. China has decided to send medical teams to Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia and Burkina Faso to assist their efforts against the COVID-19 pandemic.
China and Africa are good brothers, sharing weal and woe. We have kept in mind the valuable support that African countries have provided to China at the difficult time of its epidemic prevention and control. China follows closely the situation of the epidemic in Africa and has overcome difficulty to provide anti-epidemic materials in batches to the African Union and all African countries that have established diplomatic ties with China. Experts from two sides have conducted multiple video exchanges. Many Chinese provinces, cities, enterprises, and other government institutions have also provided anti-epidemic materials actively. All these are examples of building a closer China-Africa community of shared future. China is ready to strengthen cooperation with African countries to achieve the ultimate victory in fighting the epidemic.
Almost 20 European and African leaders have made a joint appeal for a massive international effort to boost Africa's coronavirus response. The appeal, signed by the leaders of France, Ethiopia, Germany, South Africa and other nations, calls for dramatic measures that include an immediate moratorium on all debt payments until the end of the pandemic. African officials have joined forces in recent days to appeal for billions of dollars in financial assistance and to improve their position in the global competition with richer countries for badly needed medical equipment. The African Union has appointed 4 special envoys to mobilize support and created a platform to help the continent's 54 countries bulk buy medical goods at more affordable prices. President of Malawi, Peter Mutharika, has announced a strict 3-week lockdown to tackle the spread of COVID-19. The president said during a press conference held this Wednesday that the lockdown will end on May 9th, but could be extended further. Meanwhile, dozens of health workers in Malawi's commercial capital, Blantyre, have staged a sitting to protest against poor working conditions, including a critical shortage of personal protective equipment. The action came despite the National Organization of Nurses and Midwives on Monday calling on its members to return to work following a brief strike over the weekend. Malawi, one of the last countries to confirm the presence of the coronavirus in Africa, has reported 16 cases and 2 fatalities.
He has also ordered additional staff to deal with the disease.
Namibian borders will remain closed and a partial lockdown in force for a further 2.5 weeks until May 4th as part of new measures to contain the spread of the novel coronavirus. The sparsely populated Southwest African country of under 3 million people has confirmed 16 COVID-19 cases but has not reported any new infections in the past week. Mining operations, which make up half of Namibia's export revenue, have been suspended pending the lockdown. Informal traders and open markets will still be allowed to operate, subject to strict hygiene and social distancing measures. And Africa has now seen over 16,000 confirmed coronavirus cases. According to the latest data by the Johns Hopkins University and Africa Centers for Disease Control, the entire continent is seeing a rise in cases. A number of African countries have imposed a range of prevention and containment measures against the spread of the pandemic. 873 deaths have been reported in 52 African nations. Meanwhile, the number of recovered patients has reached 3,235. South Africa remains the country with the highest number of cases at more than 2,500, closely followed by Egypt with a similar number and Algeria with over 2,100 confirmed cases. G20 nations announced support for a temporary halt of debt payment for poor countries in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic.
Ministers and governors have worked as well to deliver international financial assistance to the developing countries. Our actions today include a G20 initiative to suspend debt service payment for the poorest countries. All bilateral official creditors will participate in this initiative.
The United Nations warned on Wednesday that some 74 million people in the water-scarce Arab nation are at greater risk of catching the novel coronavirus because they lack a sink or soap at home. According to the UN report, 31 million people in Sudan, more than 14 million in war-torn Yemen, and 9.9 million in Egypt are considered at high risk of infection. Refugees and people living in conflict areas or under occupation bear an additional burden. While hand washing has been promoted as one of the key prevention measures against the coronavirus, an estimated 26 million refugees and displaced people are at greater risk of contracting the illness region-wide, as they lack adequate access to water and hygiene services. FIFA and the World Health Organization have teamed up to combat the coronavirus by launching a new awareness campaign led by world-famous footballers, calling on people around the world to follow 5 key steps to stop the spread of the disease. We finish this news brief with one of the videos produced to promote this initiative. Don't forget to follow us on social media and check out our website, telesurenglish.net. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.
For the first time ever, we, the entire world, are all playing on the same team. Our opponent is a disease. We need determination, discipline, and teamwork to beat the coronavirus. The world of football is united, and together we will win.
There are 5 key steps to tackling the coronavirus: hands, elbow, face, distance, and feel.
Comece pelas mãos. Por favor, lave as mãos com frequência usando sabão ou gel desinfetante.
With your elbows bent, please cover your nose and mouth if you sneeze or cough. If using tissues, dispose of them immediately.
Respecto a la cara, evita tocarte tus ojos, nariz y boca, así puedes evitar que el virus entre en tu cuerpo.
保持距离。对于人与人的交往而言，要保持一定的距离。对于有咳嗽等症状的人来说，更要保持在1.5米以上的距离。要学会避让，躲开。
Si vous vous sentez mal, restez chez vous et suivez scrupuleusement les consignes des autorités sanitaires.